effectively what we are hoping to do, both Paul and myself, this weekend in these sessions is preach, and on top of that, give you opportunities, which we'll talk about it a little bit in a minute, to discuss perhaps some of the things, ask questions, and thrash out together some of the implications of some of the things that are being said. So if you'd like to take notes, encourage you to do so. That helps you to write questions down and prompts later, then that would be a very good thing. Thomas Jefferson. I'm sure some of you know that name. Thomas Jefferson. He is a well-known name of American history. He was actually the third president of the United States. He led that country from 1801 to 1809. Jefferson was the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, which of course is an extremely significant document in American history. So he was the principal author of that. But Thomas Jefferson was also the author of another book, and it has become to be known as the Jefferson Bible. Not a real Bible, it's not a full Bible, but that's what it's become to be known. And I say it's not a full Bible, that is, it's not a whole Bible. What actually it is, it's a cut and paste job of the Gospels, where he put together his own story of Jesus. And when I say cut and paste, I literally mean that. Because Jefferson went through the Gospels, he went through Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, and with the use of scissors, he cut out the sections he didn't like, and he left in the sections that were appealing to him, that he felt comfortable with, the things that he liked. He cut out anything that was supernatural, and he left in the bits that really fitted with his thinking. So that meant when it comes to the birth of Christ, cut out the angels. When it comes to the death of Christ, he cut out the resurrection. When it comes to the teaching of Christ, well, there'd be no hell. When it comes to the life of Christ and the good deeds he did, there would be no miracles. So in the end, the Jefferson Bible was a book that he felt quite comfortable with. It was one that was just of the Gospels, his view of the Gospels, but it was one that suited him via the use of his scissors. Now, I'm not sure about you, but when we hear that, we might, I think, rightly think, how could anyone be so arrogant? How could anyone think that they could be bold enough to create their own Bible, leaving out parts that you don't like, and including only the parts that you do like? Well, in many ways, we all have the tendency to do just that. We too can get out, maybe not literal scissors, hopefully you wouldn't do that, but maybe mental scissors, and we would take out the parts or gloss over the parts that really don't sit too well with us, that make us feel uncomfortable. We're quick to read the encouraging parts of the Bible, the encouraging passages, and we would like to, wouldn't we, avoid the challenging ones, the ones that seem to speak more directly to us, and we'd like to treat those ones as if they're just not there. So getting out our mental scissors, as it were, and removing them from before our own eyes. Well, there's a passage in 1 John that we might be inclined, if we took on the Jefferson approach and had scissors, that we might be inclined to cut out. In many ways, it's a simple verse, though it's a little confrontive. It's a little provocative, if you like, for us. And it simply says this: do not love the world or the things in the world. And that's in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15. Do not love the world or the things in the world. Now those words, I think, provide for us the theme of, or we could call this the theme verse for the subject that I'm going to be addressing this weekend. And that theme is overcoming worldliness. So my task is, over several sessions, to open up this broad theme of overcoming worldliness, but by taking you to some basic passages in the Bible. So we're not here to take out our scissors. We're not here to avoid what God says, but I trust that you're going to be honest with me and that we will seek to digest honestly God's Word, and if we can, work out how these biblical passages, how these parts of the Bible that address this whole subject of worldliness, how they apply, the principles, the precepts, how they apply to our situation, how they apply to your situation today. And naturally along the way, I will bring out some applications, but it's really, I guess, that's the main area that for me, after we've finished the preaching opportunity, and if, we would have an opportunity of discussing together, then to me I would like to see that happen. I want to encourage that interaction of discussion and perhaps even questions if you want to do that at the end of the session tonight. Perhaps more so, it may be more lean itself more so tomorrow and Monday, particularly tomorrow morning. But anyway, we'll see how we go together. Effectively tonight, what I want us to do is take you to a passage here in 1 John chapter 2, lay out a basic understanding of the command to overcome worldliness, and then tomorrow morning get more into the nitty-gritty of how it applies to our lives. Okay? And then Sunday morning, when I have another opportunity to address the subject, which will be in the context of the service at BBC, I want us to look at how to overcome worldliness. And then I'm hoping that on Monday morning, if you're still with us, to wrap up the whole weekend with a more positive consideration of how we are to be living for God in this world. So in 1 John, if you would find it now, chapter 2, and I would like just to read this paragraph in 1 John 2 from verse 15 to 17. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. So before we get to any of your questions that may be in your mind when you hear about this subject, overcoming, like, does overcoming worldliness mean I should skip certain movies? Does overcoming worldliness mean, what does that mean when it comes to my music taste? What about my iPod? What about the different styles of music? What about wearing trendy clothes? What about YouTube? What about Facebook? What about my car? What about my would-be highly paid job I hope to have one day if I don't have it already? Before we get to any of those specific questions, we need to get a handle on this basic command here. It's a broad command. We need to understand something of the words that God is saying to us here before we can get on to those other issues, lest we be putting the cart before the horse. Okay? What we see here is John appealing to those who he's writing to. He's more than appealing, he's giving some direct words from God. John, remember, is living at a time when he did not have an iPod in his pocket. He's living at a time, probably in Ephesus. He didn't have a plasma screen in his living room in Ephesus. He's living at a time when it wasn't like all those modern things, but he's obviously living at a time when worldliness was just as much a real danger for Christians then as it is today with all of our gizmos. Okay, so in the end it's not about gizmos, it's about this whole thing of what is worldliness. So I want us to think then about this command here in verse 15. That's really all I want us to look at, is verse 15. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. There's nothing subtle about that. There's nothing vague, is there, about that sentence. If you like things to be black and white, well, you've got a good verse here. It's short, isn't it? It's straight to the point. It is actually a command in the Greek language, and there's not a lot of room here to move. Simple words. Do not love the world. And as you think about the breadth of this, it's rather comprehensive in its scope. Do not love the world, or anything, or everything, we could even say, in it. But we can't go too far in our thinking of trying to understand what John is saying here without us understanding this term, world. If we misdefine that term, if we get that wrong, well, we're going to be way off track. So the first thing I want us to do, and really the heart of what I want us to do in this first place, is identify this term. If you're writing notes and want a heading, that's heading number 1. Identify this term. World. So, well, that should be pretty easy, shouldn't it? I wonder if we played a little game here and we got each of you to write down on a piece of paper what your definition of world is. I guarantee we would not get the same answer. But that's a little bit irrelevant to this because we don't want to know your opinion. What's the word actually mean here in the Bible? World. Well, that's not as easy either as you might think. Because the Bible uses the term world in several different ways. The word world is used over 230 times just in the New Testament. And each of those times it's not the same. Now obviously there's a lot of repetition there. So for instance, sometimes the word world in the Bible can refer to the physical universe. Such as John 1:10 where it says the world was made through him. It's the same world, same word, world, but it's got its understanding to be, that is, that God is the creator of this physical universe, this world. Or other times the word world can refer to the planet that we live on. Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Matthew clarifies that when in his account in Matthew 28 he speaks about this as all the nations on the planet Earth. He says, go and make disciples of all the nations. So go everywhere on the earth, in all the world, he's saying. Other times the word world refers more specifically to the residents, to the people who live on the world. So it's the world of mankind. It's the totality of humanity. Such as in Luke chapter 2 and verse 1, it says, in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. Well, that wasn't about the planets. That wasn't about the geographical place on the earth of the various national divisions. That was people. That was humanity. That was the people of the world. So you see how this word world's used differently just in those 3 different examples I've given you. So what's John on about here? What's John driving at here? Well, the word world that he uses here in chapter 2 and verse 15 is the realm which is in opposition to God. So John's speaking about the world system in which there is rebellion toward God, in which there is an alienation from God. It's the world system in which things operate as if God doesn't exist. It's living life without God on the radar. That's the world. Where plans are made, entertainments and sports are enjoyed with absolutely no reference to God. John is speaking about the world system which Satan holds under his sway. You have 1 John open. Turn over to chapter 5 and look at verse 15. And you'll see in these passages how John keeps using this term. 1 John 5 verse 19. We know that we are of God, and the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. So the world system is under Satan's sway. In John 12 verse 31, it identifies Satan as the ruler of the world, this world. The world is under his sway. Satan is the ruler of this world. Now, we know God's the ruler of the world, so how does this work? Well, one way to think of that is that God has given to Satan, if you like, some rope. So he's like a dog, he's got a rope around him. He's on a leash. God's given Satan a little bit of rope, as it were. And he's like a lion, and he's walking about, he's roaming about the earth. He's seeking whom he may devour in this realm in which God has given him and allowed him to have a little bit of rope. This is his realm. This is the system of this world that's under his sway. Paul calls this world in Galatians 1:4 this present evil age. So he makes it clear this is the world system. This is the sinful system of this world. But if you go back to chapter 3 of 1 John and verse 1, the world that John speaks about is ignorant of God. Behold what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called the children of God. Therefore the world does not know us, because it did not know him. The world is not interested in Jesus. He came into this world, but the world did not recognize him. The world did not know him. The world was not interested in him. The whole world system is dead against Jesus and his gospel. It's not just sort of disinterested in him. They're actually against him. In chapter 3, verse 13, John says, "Do not marvel, my brethren, if the world hates you." Jesus had previously said in the Gospel of John, "If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, therefore the world hates you." So John's saying here, in 1 John 3:13, the world hates you. And Jesus had already said the reason it hates you is because the world hates me. This is the world in which John is speaking about. It's the fallen world. It's the people, it's the system, it's the philosophies, it's the principles of this sinful world, this present evil age. And James, in James chapter 4, verse 4, speaking about this world, he says, "Do you not know that friendship with this world is enmity against God?" So he's not saying you can't be friends with the created world. He's talking about people. He's talking about the whole evil age in which we live, that's resisting God, that's trying to live as if God doesn't exist and is actually an enemy of God. So John says to us in 1 John 2:15, in this command, do not love this evil world, and do not love the things in this rebellious and opposing world. Okay, so we need to understand then this term world. This is the Satan-ruled, the sin-filled, the pleasure-orientated world. It's an enemy of God. It hates Christ. It hates the followers of Christ. And therefore, we who are Christians, we must avoid snuggling up to this world and cuddling this world. We must not do that. Remember, Paul says in Romans 12:1, do not be conformed to this world. He's got something else to say about this. In James chapter 1, he says, keep yourself unspotted. Don't become polluted by this world. Now, we all know, don't we, that originally when God created the world, that he did a very good job. That it was created to reflect the glory of God. But now, due to the entrance of sin, this world lives in rebellion against the Lord and his Christ. This world now has become a fallen world. This world now has become a disordered world that's in the grip of its ruler, Satan. This world is alienated from the Lord God Almighty. It's in rebellion to its creator and its sustainer. Now, of course, in our day, which is 2,000 years, or just under, 1900 years after John wrote this, our world today, this sinful, fallen world, is not distant. It's not in the next town. It's not just round the corner. It's in our face. This whole system. Our affluent, our technologically advanced society brings the world into our face. Not just at the doorsteps of our houses. It comes into our homes. It's in our faces all the time. It baits our eyes. It tickles our ears. It's even trying to seduce us and to get us to give in to its temptations. We are saturated with media. We are bombarded as we live today with images. Images on TV. Images on the movie screen. Images on the billboard. We are bombarded with images. We have music coming into our ears wherever we seem to go, whether it's in the shops, whether it's in the supermarket, whether it's in our cars, or whether it be on your MP3 players, in the headphones, the earphones in your head. We have unlimited access to this world's philosophies and priorities. We have, most of us, internet access. It's pretty well instant, pretty well any time we may want to do it. For many people, it's even available on their phones, which they carry around in their back pockets or in their bags. Now, obviously, those things that I've just mentioned, they themselves are not inherently evil in and of themselves, but they can very easily be the vehicles of a fallen world. They can deliver endless opportunities to pursue pleasure without regard for God and His Son. Endless occasions to be seduced by this fallen world and to succumb to the sins of worldliness. So we have this great need for us to be carefully understanding this command that we have here in 1 John 2:15. Do not love the world or the things in the world. There is no room for move here. Do not do it. There's no option. Do not love the world or the things in the world. So having identified what this world is, now I want us to, in the second place, think of the command more directly. And secondly, what I'm calling, by way of a heading, clarify the duty. We've identified the time and term, and now clarify the duty. How do we do this? How do we ascertain what this really is? Well, I think sometimes when we try and define things and understand them, for me at least, maybe not for you, but for me, because I'm the one talking, so you've got to hear what I'm going to say, we need to understand what it's not. And if we understand what it's not, that will help us a little to go towards the right direction of what it is. Okay, so in the first place, what this is not saying, what John is not saying here, do not love the world. John is not telling us to withdraw from society and go into seclusion somewhere, like a monk in a monastery. He's not saying that. He is not saying you should pack up your bag and go and live in a hut somewhere out the back of Burke. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying to us, well, you can stay where you are, but you need to isolate yourself from those around you so you can go and live up a tree by yourself, and by doing that you'll overcome the world. He's not saying that. That's not what he's saying. You see, escaping is not overcoming. They're two different things. If we head bush, if we climb a tree, we still carry a piece of the world with us. It's called remaining sin as Christians. So we do not obey this command by moving into a monastery, or let's put it a different way. We do not obey this command by building for ourselves a nice little house on the prairie. Okay? That's not how you obey this command. The little house on the prairie is a nice story. And I'm all for it, largely. But that's not the idea that he is saying here. That's not what this is saying. John is not promoting establishing Christian communities where Christians all come and live together and pool their resources together and they cut themselves off from the world, like the Amish people do. Some of you may know about the Amish people, particularly there's areas in America. And there are people there who live without electricity. They live without telephones. They live without cars. They still drive their buggies, their horse-drawn buggies. And this is some sort of an attempt to overcome the world. We don't overcome the world by withdrawing from the world or not using modern technology. That's not how we overcome the world. Jesus' words are really plain to us. And I want you to turn now to the Gospel of John and John chapter 17. This is the same John, of course, that wrote the epistle that we're looking at. He's recording the words of Jesus in John 17. Jesus here in John 17 is praying He's praying to his Father, as you can see in verse 1, Father, the hour has come, glorify your Son, that your Son also may glorify you. So he's praying about the fact that his mission is coming towards an end. He is very soon, within the next hours and day, about to die for his people. So as he's praying for the situation that lies before him, that he's going to glorify his Father as he has been glorifying his Father. He's praying for his disciples. He's praying for all believers in this prayer in John 17. In verse 14, he says these very relevant words to our subject. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. So Jesus says his disciples were to stay living here. But he's praying that they may be delivered from the world's evil system, from the evil one who has this whole world under his sway. I do not pray that you would take them out of the world, but that you would keep them in the world, and that they would be those who could overcome the world, effectively what he's saying. Verse 18, as you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world. So Christ's disciples are to make contact with the people of the world. When Jesus came into this world, did he just have no contact with people? Of course not. Well, just as I was sent into the world, so I send them into the world to have contact with people. Not to be cut off from people. The little house on the prairie, or if you would prefer living up in a tree house by ourselves, that is not what the Lord is directing us to do in 1 John 2:15. Okay? Is that helpful? It's not what it is. That's not what he is saying. So what is this then saying? Go back to 1 John 2 and verse 15. We see what it's not. Now, what this is saying. Let's read again the verses. Do not love the world, 1 John 2:15. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And we'll look more closely at that verse tomorrow morning. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. Now, can you see how John is not directing our attention toward a particular object? He's not directing our attention toward a particular activity. As he's giving this outline, as he gives this command about worldliness, it's not about a thing that you do or a place that you go or a particular item that you wear. John's words are directed somewhere else. They are directed toward the heart. He doesn't say in this, don't touch this. He doesn't say, do not go there. I don't want you to wear that. I don't want you to watch that. I don't want you to listen to that. That's not John's approach. We might prefer that approach, but that's not John's approach. The main thing John is driving at here is our heart's affection and our heart's attitude. See, in the end, this is a heart issue. This is not a matter of legalistic set of rules. This is not a matter of listing out all the do's. This is what I'm allowed to do. I can tick all those boxes. And listing out all the don'ts. This is what I'm not allowed to do. These are the don'ts. This is not about that. This is about your heart in the end. You see why I'm saying that? Do not love the world. Do not love the things in the world. Now, the issue of love is fundamentally an issue of the heart. We love. It's an issue of the heart. And he says, well, do not love. The issue of heart when it comes to the world. Now, this is so crucial. I don't want you to miss this, and I had to say this up front. This is the main thing I really wanted to say tonight. This is a vital thing for us to grasp. Worldliness is fundamentally not about externals. John takes us inside. That's where he takes us. And that's where worldliness ultimately is. It exists in our hearts. It doesn't exist out there. It exists in our hearts. It's not primarily related to outward behaviour, though our actions can certainly display worldliness within. So we're not saying it's not about actions, but we're saying in the end, the primary issue that it's about is heart. It's internal. The real location of worldliness is not out there, it's internal. It resides in our hearts. Now please turn to the book of Proverbs and chapter 4, just to keep you awake. Wasn't going to turn you there, but just to keep you with me. Proverbs 4:23. Keep your heart with all diligence. Why would I do that? Solomon says, here's the reason why. For out of it, out of your heart, springs the issues of life. Out of your heart flows, comes, bubbles forth the issues of life. Everything, therefore, in your life, everything about you, in the end, boils down to what's going on in your heart and where your heart is. So as we come back to 1 John 2:15, we come back to this clear, this simple command that's nestled here in the setting of a serious warning. Ultimately, this is not John, is it? I mean, John's the man who picked up the pen to write, but ultimately it's God who's speaking through John. So John is giving us God's words. God is saying to us, God is warning us here. God is commanding us here. But of course he's doing it in love. He wants the best for us. He has the bigger picture in view. And we need to see then that these words in 1 John 2:15, do not love the world or the things in the world. These are not legalistic restrictions from an irritated God who doesn't want us to enjoy ourselves. That's not what this is. We see the essence of worldliness is defined primarily as a matter of the heart. Your heart and my heart. And in particular, if you notice in the second half of verse 15, John contrasts for us love for the world and for someone else. You see that? If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. So John is saying that the true child of God, the true Christian, cannot have a heart given over to the world. It is not possible. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. So let me ask you, who are you living for? Or what are you living for, maybe? Well, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What are you passionate about once you're out of bed? What preoccupies you? What preoccupies your thinking, your heart? What's the main thing that governs you when your time and your thoughts are your own? What's the thing that's really got you? Is the Lord Jesus the one who holds the chief place of affection and desire in your heart? If you love the world, then it can't be the Lord Jesus. They can't go together. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. So as we've tried to get a handle on worldliness tonight, we've seen that worldliness is a heart issue, that it finds its highest enjoyment, it finds its deepest fulfillment in a world where God is absent, at least in people's thinking, or God is marginalised, he's pushed to the side. Put another way, let's just put this thing a different way. worldliness is a failure to love the Lord God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. It's choosing the pleasures, it's choosing the pursuits and the philosophies of the world as our chief desire. It's choosing them as our deepest delight, and it's choosing them above God. Maybe we might think we can have God a little bit, but it's the main thing that we've got. And you know, to the extent that you and I fail to give God our highest devotion, to the extent that we substitute earthly pleasures, earthly treasures in the place of God, to that extent we are guilty of the sin of worldliness, even as Christians. So maybe you are a Christian, maybe you are a true child of God, but recently the world has been luring you, has been drawing you, and your heart's been lured away. Your thinking has begun to be changed. Maybe it's your studies, maybe it's your possessions, maybe it's your music, maybe it's your career, or your one-day career for some of you. And maybe that thing, whichever it is, has become your main focus. And it's probably what you've been thinking about over the last 30 minutes and even the last 30 seconds. That's probably what it is. Your heart's affection has been stolen away from Christ, your Saviour and your Master. And instead of listening to Him and instead of obeying Him, you have begun to drift into worldly thinking. Where's your heart? That's the issue for all of us. Where's our hearts? John is wisely drawing our attention inside. The root issue is within. You see, before we start applying this issue of worldliness to externals, we must start with ourselves. We must start with the root issue that is not external, it's internal, it's not environmental, it's about us and about what's within us. We must learn to discern worldliness and know where it lurks. It lurks in your heart and my heart. And that's where we need to be alert. Now hopefully, Lord willing, we'll open up more of the practical application tomorrow. But let me just ask some further questions just by way of application to finish. And there'll be different things for different ones of you. We're not a big group, but there's enough variety amongst us for me to know that there'll be different things that are going to be appealing to different people. Does that music, does that gizmo, that career or recreation, that thing, does it have an unhealthy grip on your life? To the point that you can't live without it? We can get addicted to things, can't we? We can get addicted to things that are harmless in themselves. You've got to have the music on when you hop in the car. You're addicted to it. You can't go on the train without the plugs in your ears. You're addicted to it. Has it got a grip on you? You imagine living your life without that thing, whatever it is? Does Jesus Christ hold the place of deepest devotion? Is it His pleasure that you're seeking? Not your own? Whose pleasure are you seeking? You see, you can't serve two masters, Jesus said. Either you'll love the one and hate the other. You'll be loyal to one, or you'll despise the other. And at the end of the day, either you are overcoming worldliness, or worldliness is overcoming you. The heart of worldliness, that's what I've entitled tonight's message. The heart of worldliness is a heart that loves these temporal things. It loves them and it lives for them. But John clearly says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. God willing, tomorrow morning, as I said before, I would like us to come back to this passage and look more closely at verse 16. And for us to get a clearer grasp on the way the world is attractive to us. And I want us to look at the lure of worldliness tomorrow morning, God willing, which will be in the second session tomorrow morning.